Good morning again. I just spoke on the subject of um, the importance of trees. I'm going to shift gears now and speak to the importance of uh, the war in Ukraine, but mainly as it pertains to the sovereignty of nations. Uh, the United Nations was formed to protect humans from the horrors of armed conflict. And its main purpose, among others, but main purpose was to do this, to establish and protect the sovereignty of nations. So after its creation, after World War II, uh, the United Nations was tasked with the process of defining the boundaries of nations and establishing them and protecting them through international law. We as a species now can easily understand the common bond we share with each other as members of this species of Homo sapiens, of humans, and the importance of collectively protecting ourselves. Probably the greatest threat we face is from other human beings that disagree with us and would like to have whatever it is we happen to have. And the United Nations understanding, or the people of the planet understanding the devastation and horror of armed conflict, having just suffered through years of global warfare in the Second World War, attempted to diminish as much as possible the prospect of war between nations. Unfortunately, when the United Nations was formed, to get it off the ground, a very significant and serious compromise had to be made. And that compromise was that a Security Council was formed of 7 nations that had to vote unanimously for any significant international intervention to be instituted. That meant that any of those nations that disagreed with whatever the sanction was that was suggested could veto that sanction. So 1 out of 7 could queer the deal, so to speak. And this has happened over and over and over and over again during the history of the United Nations, and is a hopefully not fatal flaw, but nonetheless a serious flaw. Unfortunately, it may take another global conflict for us to, as a species, to finally correct this flaw and learn to live together in peace as a large extended family, but with serious family ties and acceptance of serious boundaries that cannot be crossed. These being, in the case of this discussion, the borders of sovereign nations. If Russia is allowed to reclaim that part of the Soviet Union that is the eastern Ukraine, or in their attempt initially, the entire nation of the Ukraine, through armed conflict by sending Russian troops into the sovereign nation of Ukraine. It will be a precedent that will completely eliminate the power of the United Nations. It will basically castrate the United Nations, make it impotent. So the importance of the sovereignty of nations is extremely critical for the preservation of human life on planet Earth. This is because we now have the weapons available in large numbers that can eliminate human life on Earth in the form of nuclear weapons. We have a huge stockpile. Russia has a huge stockpile. China is getting a huge stockpile. Britain, France, and Israel have, I don't know how big, large stockpiles. And Iran would like to have its own nuclear weapons. Most nations would like to have nuclear weapons as a deterrent against other nations using nuclear weapons against them. Well, basically, we humans are sitting on a powder keg that if anybody strikes a match, the entire powder keg is very likely to blow up, taking us all with it. So protecting the sovereignty of nations becomes even more critical due to the presence and power of nuclear weapons. Therefore, it becomes critical that we protect the sovereign boundaries of the Ukraine. I'm going to speak to another subject that will extend this talk just a little bit, and that is my feeling that the United Nations, given the power to protect the boundaries of other nations, is critically important to the survival of humanity. Its prime directive, I think, should have been and should be to make it against international law for military troops or military equipment to cross international boundaries. In other words, all wars should be civil wars fought within boundaries. Other nations can pick sides like in a football game and sit in the stands and cheer for their favorite team, so to speak, but it should be against international law for one nation to send troops into another nation. Obviously, Russia has sent Russian troops into Ukraine, thus committing an act of aggression against the rest of the countries on the planet. Of course, the United States did this in Vietnam. The French had been doing this in Vietnam for the preceding 100 years or so. We did it again in Grenada. We did it again in Iraq. And we did it again in Afghanistan. All of these actions, military actions, under the rules established by the United Nations, were illegal and acts of aggression against humanity itself. we're not necessarily the good guys. But the fact that we committed sins in the past doesn't justify the sins of other nations. And hopefully we have learned from our misdeeds and the horrors that they wrought upon the people of other nations. But at this point, we can't allow other nations to invade sovereign nations. It was illegal under international law for Hamas to raid Israel and murder citizens of Israel. But by the same token, it is illegal under international law for Israel to invade Gaza or the West Bank, to invade Palestine, and should be considered so. These disputes are international in nature. The definition of international boundaries should be made by a single body, that being the United Nations, and they should be enforced by all of the nations of the planet. War itself, except for civil war, should be illegal, and supplying one side or the other in any armed conflict with arms or military equipment or military personnel in the form of combatants or advisors should be illegal under international law, and we as humans should agree to enforce those laws with necessary sanctions and, if necessary, interventions. Sovereign nations need to be respected as sovereign nations and treated as such.